What happens when a childhood promise becomes a deadly vow? When innocence meets the darkness of the underworld, and love becomes the most dangerous weapon of all? Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell. This story will leave you speechless. The rain hammered against the windows of the Moretti mansion like bullets against armor, each drop echoing through the marble halls where silence had become Vincent's only companion. At 32, Vincent Moretti commanded respect through fear, his name whispered in the darkest corners of New York's underworld. The scar running from his left temple to his jaw served as a permanent reminder of the price of trust in his world. The mansion itself was a fortress disguised as elegance, bulletproof, windows hidden behind silk curtains, reinforced walls masked by priceless artwork, and enough hidden weapons to arm a small militia. Vincent had inherited more than just a criminal empire from his father. He'd inherited the paranoia that kept him alive. Every room contained escape routes. Every entrance was monitored by cameras that fed to a security center manned 24 hours a day. And every piece of furniture was positioned to provide cover in case of attack. The building had been in the Moretti family for 3 generations, purchased with blood money and maintained through violence. Vincent's grandfather had been a bootlegger during Prohibition. His father had expanded into gambling and loan sharking, and Vincent himself had modernized the operation with sophisticated money laundering schemes and international connections. But success in their world came with a price: constant vigilance, absolute ruthlessness, and the knowledge that every friend could become an enemy overnight. Tonight felt different. The weight of solitude pressed heavier than usual as Vincent sat in his study, reviewing reports of territory disputes and betrayals. The mahogany desk before him was covered with photographs of dead rivals, financial statements from legitimate businesses that laundered dirty money, and intelligence reports on families who dared to challenge Moretti supremacy. A crystal tumbler of aged whiskey sat untouched at his elbow, the amber liquid reflecting the lamplight like liquid gold. The study itself was a monument to power and paranoia. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined the walls, filled with leather-bound volumes that ranged from classic literature to detailed histories of organized crime. Hidden behind one section of books was a safe containing enough cash to buy a small country, along with passports in a dozen different names and weapons that could level a city block. The room's single window offered a commanding view of the mansion's grounds, where armed guards patrolled in patterns that changed every hour. The grandfather clock in the corner, a relic from his grandmother's time when the family still pretended to be respectable, chimed midnight when Maria, his elderly housekeeper, knocked softly. She was one of the few people who could approach him without an appointment, having raised him after his parents' assassination when he was barely 16. Maria had seen enough violence in her 60 years with the family that little could shake her, but tonight her weathered hands trembled as she clutched her rosary. "Mr. Moretti," she whispered, her voice trembling in a way that immediately put Vincent on alert. "There's been an incident. The Castellanos, they're all gone. But there's a child." Vincent's steel-gray eyes lifted from the documents, his expression hardening into the mask that had made him legendary. The Castellanos had been allies, good people who'd tried to stay clean despite their family name. Roberto Castellano had been Vincent's father's friend, a man who'd chosen legitimate business over the family trade, much to the disgust of other crime families who saw his success as a betrayal of their code. His restaurants were popular with both civilians and criminals, neutral ground where disputes could be settled over expensive wine and perfectly prepared meals. "Survivors?" Vincent asked, his voice carrying the cold efficiency that had made him legendary. "Just one. A little girl, sir. She's asking for you? By name." Maria's voice broke slightly. "She saw everything, Mr. Vincent. Everything." Vincent's blood chilled. A child asking for him specifically meant this wasn't random violence. Someone had sent a message, and an innocent family had paid the price. The Castellanos had been under his protection, their restaurants serving as meeting places for his organization. Their murder was a direct challenge to his authority, a declaration of war written in innocent blood. He followed Maria through the mansion's corridors, past portraits of dead Morettis who'd built their empire on blood and fear, to the guest room where tragedy waited. The hallway was lined with security cameras and motion sensors, but tonight they felt inadequate. If enemies could reach the Castellanos, they could reach anyone. 6-year-old Isabella sat on an oversized leather chair that dwarfed her small frame, her dark curls matted with rain and framing a face streaked with tears and dirt. Her small hands clutched a torn teddy bear, brown fur stained with what Vincent hoped was just mud, but feared was something worse. She wore a pink nightgown that had once been pristine, now torn and dirty from whatever hell she'd escaped. Her feet were bare, small and pale against the chair's dark leather. When Vincent entered, she looked up with eyes that held too much understanding for someone so young. They were dark brown, almost black, and filled with a pain that reminded Vincent of his own reflection after his parents' murder. But beneath the trauma, he saw something else, a strength that shouldn't have existed in someone so small, a core of steel that had kept her alive when her entire family had perished. "You're the man Papa talked about," she said, her voice barely above a whisper but steady despite her obvious trauma. "Vincent Moretti. Papa said you were the strongest man in New York. He said if anything bad ever happened, I should find you." Vincent knelt before her, this child who should have been terrified of him. His reputation preceded him everywhere. Mothers used his name to frighten misbehaving children. Grown men crossed themselves when they heard he was coming. Yet Isabella studied his scarred face with curious innocence rather than fear, as if she could see past the legend to the man beneath. "Your papa was a good man, Isabella?" Vincent said, his voice gentler than it had been in years. "I'm sorry for what happened to your family. They didn't deserve what was done to them." "The bad men came to our house," Isabella said matter-of-factly, as if discussing the weather. "They were looking for something Papa didn't have. They got angry when he couldn't give it to them. They hurt Mama first to make Papa talk. But Papa didn't know what they wanted." Vincent's jaw tightened. Roberto had been killed for refusing to launder money through his legitimate businesses, a principled stand that had cost him everything. The fact that they'd tortured his wife in front of him spoke to a cruelty that went beyond business, entering the realm of personal vendetta. "Do you remember anything else about these men?" Vincent asked gently. "They had tattoos on their hands. Like snakes." Isabella's small finger traced a pattern in the air, and they smelled like cigarettes and mean thoughts. "One of them had gold teeth and he laughed when Mama cried, the Torino family." Vincent filed the information away for later retribution, his mind already calculating the most painful ways to make them pay. For now his focus was on the broken child before him, this small survivor who'd witnessed horrors that would break most adults. Without warning, Isabella slipped from the chair and climbed onto his lap, her tiny hand reaching up to trace the scar on his face. The gesture was so unexpected, so gentle that Vincent froze. No one touched him without permission. No one had touched him with tenderness since. He couldn't remember when. "Does it hurt?" she asked, her finger following the raised line of damaged skin with the careful touch of someone who understood pain. "Not anymore," Vincent replied, surprised by the honesty in his voice. Isabella smiled then, a radiant expression that seemed to light the dark room despite the circumstances. It was the kind of smile that belonged to birthday parties and Christmas mornings, not to orphaned children in the home of a crime boss. But there it was, genuine and warm and somehow healing. "When I grow up, I'm going to marry you, Vincent," she announced with the absolute certainty that only children possess. "Then you'll never be alone again, and I'll never be scared again. We'll take care of each other." The words hit Vincent like a physical blow. For the first time in years, Vincent Moretti smiled. Not the cold, calculated expression he wore for business, but something real. Something human, something that reached places in his heart he'd thought were dead and buried with his parents. "Is that a promise, little one?" "Cross my heart and hope to die," Isabella said solemnly, making the gesture with her small hand pressed over her heart. "That's what you say when you mean something forever." Vincent found himself making the same gesture, sealing a pact with a 6-year-old that would change both their lives forever. "Then it's a deal, Isabella. But you have to promise me something else." "What?" "Promise me you'll grow up strong and smart and brave. Promise me you'll never let anyone make you feel small or afraid. Promise me you'll become the kind of woman who can stand beside any man as an equal." "I promise," Isabella said, then yawned, exhaustion finally overtaking adrenaline. "Can I stay here with you? I don't want to be alone. The dark feels scary now." "You'll never be alone again," Vincent promised, and meant it with every fiber of his being. "This is your home now, Isabella. For as long as you want it to be." As Isabella fell asleep in his arms, Vincent stared out at the storm raging beyond the windows and felt something shift inside him. The cold, empty mansion suddenly felt like it might become a home. The man who thought himself incapable of love found himself willing to kill anyone who tried to harm the child, sleeping trustingly against his chest. The Torino family had made their first mistake. They'd left a witness. They'd made their last mistake too. They'd given Vincent Moretti something to protect, something to love, something worth building a future around. And Vincent Moretti protected what was his with a ruthlessness that had become legendary in New York's underworld. Tomorrow, the war would begin. But tonight, for the first time in 16 years, Vincent Moretti wasn't alone. The years that followed transformed the Moretti mansion from a fortress of solitude into something resembling a home. Isabella brought light into corners that had known only darkness, her laughter echoing through halls where only whispered threats had lived before. The change was gradual but profound. Fresh flowers appeared in rooms that had been sterile. Music drifted from the piano that had sat silent for decades, and the kitchen filled with the sense of Maria's cooking as she prepared meals for a family again rather than just a solitary man. Vincent discovered that raising a child in his world required a delicate balance between protection and preparation. Isabella needed to understand the reality of their life without being corrupted by it, needed to be strong without losing her essential goodness. It was a tightrope walk that kept him awake at night, wondering if he was doing right by the little girl who'd trusted him with her future. He hired the best tutors money could buy, former professors who asked no questions about their employer's business, language instructors who taught Isabella to speak Italian, French, Spanish, and Russian with native fluency. She absorbed knowledge like a sponge, her quick mind impressing even Vincent's most cynical associates. By age 8, she could discuss literature with the sophistication of a college student, solve mathematical problems that challenged teenagers, and speak 4 languages fluently. But Vincent also ensured she learned practical skills. Self-defense classes with a former Navy SEAL who taught her to use her small size as an advantage. Computer skills from a reformed hacker who showed her how to navigate the digital world safely. And always, always the importance of reading people, understanding their motivations, their weaknesses, their tells. Why do people fear you? 8-year-old Isabella asked one evening as they played chess in his study. It had become their nightly ritual, a quiet hour where the outside world couldn't intrude. The chessboard was an antique, carved from ivory and ebony, with pieces that had been in the Moretti family for generations. Vincent considered his answer carefully as he moved his knight. Isabella deserved honesty, but she also deserved her innocence for as long as possible. Because fear keeps them honest. In our world, respect and fear are often the same thing. People who fear you won't betray you, won't lie to you, won't try to hurt what you care about. But I'm not afraid of you, Isabella said, capturing his bishop with her queen and grinning triumphantly. Her strategy was improving with each game, her young mind grasping concepts that took most people years to understand. You should be, Vincent replied, though his tone held no threat. I'm not a good man, Isabella. I've done things, terrible things, things that would give you nightmares if you knew about them. Isabella studied the chessboard, then looked up at him with those dark eyes that seemed to see straight through to his soul. You could have sent me to an orphanage or to distant relatives. Instead, you gave me a home, a family, a future. That's what good men do. It's not that simple. The world isn't divided into good people and bad people. Most of us are somewhere in between, making choices based on what we think we have to do to survive. Yes, it is that simple, Isabella said firmly, moving her queen again and putting his king in check. You saved me. You protect people who can't protect themselves. You keep your word. Those are the things that matter. Vincent stared at the board, realizing that somehow this child had checkmated him both in chess and in life. She saw goodness in him that he'd long since given up believing existed, and her faith was slowly changing how he saw himself. By age 10, Isabella understood the family business without Vincent ever explicitly explaining it. She knew why certain men visited late at night, why Vincent always carried a gun, and why she had bodyguards disguised as tutors. She observed everything with intelligent eyes and asked questions that showed she understood far more than any child should. The mansion's daily routine revolved around security protocols that Isabella learned as naturally as other children learned to ride bicycles. She knew which cars were safe, which routes to take to school, which people could be trusted. She understood that her life was different from other children's, but she accepted it with a maturity that both impressed and saddened Vincent. Mr. Torino came by today, she mentioned casually one afternoon while doing homework at Vincent's desk. She was working on advanced calculus problems that would challenge high school students, her pencil moving with confident strokes across the paper. Vincent's blood ran cold. "What did you say?" "Nothing. I hid in the secret passage behind the bookshelf like you taught me." Isabella looked up from her mathematics, her expression serious. "But I listened. He wants to buy our shipping business. He offered twice what it's worth." "And what do you think about that?" Isabella considered the question with the seriousness of a much older person. "I think he's the man with snake tattoos who killed my family. I think he wants to hurt you like he hurt them. And I think you should be very, very careful." Vincent realized then that Isabella wasn't just growing up in his world. She was becoming part of it, developing the instincts and intelligence that would keep her alive. It both impressed and terrified him. She was losing her childhood innocence, but gaining something more valuable, the tools to survive in a world that would always be dangerous for anyone connected to the Moretti name. The transformation became more apparent as Isabella entered her teenage years. She moved with a grace that spoke of confidence and training, her posture always alert, her eyes constantly scanning for threats. She could spot a concealed weapon from across a room, identify an undercover police officer by his shoes, and read the subtle signs that indicated when someone was lying. "I want to learn to shoot," Isabella announced on her 12th birthday, her voice carrying a determination that reminded Vincent of himself at that age. "Absolutely not." "Vincent," she said, using the tone that reminded him she was no longer the 6-year-old who'd climbed onto his lap. "I live in this world whether you acknowledge it or not. I'd rather be prepared than helpless. You taught me that strength comes from knowledge and preparation." The logic was sound, even if Vincent hated admitting it. He taught her himself, taking her to the mansion's private shooting range in the basement. The range was state-of-the-art, with computerized targets and sound dampening that ensured their practice sessions remained private. Isabella proved to be a natural marksman, her small hands steady, her aim true, her focus absolute. "You're better than most of my men," Vincent admitted, after she'd put 6 bullets through the center of a target at 50 yards. "I had a good teacher," Isabella replied, then surprised him by adding, "and good motivation. I never want to be helpless again. I never want to watch someone I love die because I couldn't protect them." The words hit Vincent like a physical blow. Isabella wasn't just learning to shoot for self-defense, she was preparing to protect him, to stand beside him when the inevitable violence came. The realization filled him with pride and terror in equal measure. By age 14, Isabella had grown into a striking young woman. Her dark hair fell in waves past her shoulders, her eyes held depths that spoke of intelligence and strength, and she moved with a grace that commanded attention. Vincent found himself having to intimidate teenage boys who showed too much interest, a task that both amused and concerned his associates. The mansion's staff treated Isabella with a respect that went beyond mere politeness. They recognized her as Vincent's heir in all but name, the person who would one day inherit not just his wealth but his responsibilities. She handled their deference with natural grace, never demanding special treatment, but accepting it as her due. "You're going to have to let her date eventually," Tony Ricci, Vincent's oldest friend and advisor, pointed out one evening after Vincent had discouraged yet another suitor. "Over my dead body," Vincent replied, his tone suggesting that might be literally true. "That can be arranged," Tony said with a grin. "But seriously, Vincent, she's growing up. You can't protect her from everything forever. And the way you're acting, people are starting to talk." Vincent knew Tony was right, but the thought of Isabella with anyone else made his chest tight with an emotion he refused to examine too closely. She was his responsibility, his— What, daughter? Ward? The girl who'd promised to marry him when she grew up? The night before she left for university in London, a compromise that would give her the education she deserved while keeping her safe from New York's dangers, Isabella found Vincent on the mansion's balcony, staring out at the city lights. The balcony had become their private space over the years, a place where they could talk without the weight of the family business pressing down on them. "Having second thoughts about sending me away?" she asked, joining him at the railing. At 18, she was breathtakingly beautiful, but it was her intelligence and strength that truly made her remarkable. "Every day for the past month," Vincent admitted. But you need to see the world beyond this. You need to choose your own path, discover who you are when you're not defined by the Moretti name. My path leads back here, Vincent. Back to you. She turned to face him, her dark eyes serious. I meant what I said when I was 6. That wasn't a child's fantasy. Isabella, I know you think of me as that little girl, but I'm not her anymore. When I come back, I'll be a woman. And I'll still choose you. She paused, studying his face in the moonlight. The question is whether you'll be brave enough to choose me back. She kissed his cheek softly, the gesture innocent yet somehow charged with promise, before walking away. Vincent remained on the balcony long after she'd gone, staring out at the city and trying to ignore the terrifying realization that somewhere along the way, he'd begun to hope she meant every word. The next morning, as Isabella's plane lifted off from JFK Airport, Vincent felt a piece of his heart go with her. The mansion seemed impossibly empty without her laughter, her questions, her presence that had made him feel human again. 4 years stretched ahead of them like an eternity, and Vincent threw himself into business with renewed intensity, expanding the family's legitimate enterprises while ruthlessly eliminating threats to their power. But every night, he stood on that balcony and wondered if the woman who returned would still be the girl who'd promised to marry him. He was about to find out, and the anticipation was both thrilling and terrifying. 4 years later, Vincent stood in the arrivals terminal of JFK Airport, his usual entourage of bodyguards maintaining a respectful distance. The years had been kind to him. At 36, he was still imposing, still dangerous, though perhaps a few more gray threads in his dark hair and a few more lines around his eyes spoke to the weight of command and the loneliness of Isabella's absence. The terminal buzzed with typical New York energy, families reuniting, business travelers hurrying to their next destination, tourists marveling at the city's pace. But Vincent saw none of it. His attention was focused entirely on the international arrivals gate, waiting for a glimpse of the woman Isabella had become. He'd received regular reports from his security team in London, knew she'd excelled academically and socially, but reports couldn't capture the essence of a person. During her absence, Vincent had built an empire that spanned continents. The Moretti name was respected from New York to Naples, from London to Hong Kong, but success felt hollow without Isabella to share it with. He'd dated occasionally, sophisticated, women who understood the rules of his world, but none had touched the place in his heart that belonged to the girl who'd promised to marry him when Isabella emerged from the crowd. Vincent's breath caught in his throat. At 22, she moved with a grace that commanded attention without demanding it. Her designer coat, clearly expensive but understated, and confident stride marked her as someone accustomed to power. Her dark hair fell in sophisticated waves past her shoulders, and when their eyes met across the terminal, Vincent felt the same jolt of recognition he'd experienced when she was 6 years old. But this wasn't the girl he'd sent away. This was a woman who could stand beside him as an equal, someone who'd learned to navigate the world's most exclusive circles with the same ease she'd once shown in his study. "Vincent?" she said as she approached, her voice carrying a slight British accent that somehow made his name sound like a caress. She moved to embrace him, and Vincent caught the subtle scent of expensive perfume mixed with something uniquely Isabella, a combination that sent his pulse racing. Isabella. He found himself momentarily speechless, struck by the transformation. The girl who'd left had been beautiful. The woman who'd returned was magnificent. There was a confidence in her bearing that spoke of someone who'd tested herself against the world and emerged victorious. "You look good," she said, studying his face with those dark eyes that missed nothing. "Older, maybe a little tired, but good. The gray suits you, makes you look distinguished rather than dangerous. You look—" Vincent struggled for words that wouldn't sound inappropriate. "You look like you could conquer the world." Isabella's smile was radiant, filled with the same warmth he remembered but tempered now with adult sophistication. "I intend to, starting with New York." The ride back to the mansion was filled with stories of her time abroad, her double degree in international business and political science from Oxford, her internship with a prestigious London investment firm, the languages she'd mastered, the connections she'd made in Europe's financial and political circles. But beneath the conversation, Vincent sensed something else, a purpose that went beyond mere education. "I wasn't just studying." "Vincent," she explained as their armored car navigated Manhattan traffic. The city had changed during her absence. New buildings reaching toward the sky, different neighborhoods gentrifying. The constant evolution that defined New York. I was building networks, learning how legitimate power works, understanding how to move money and influence across international borders without attracting unwanted attention. Vincent listened with growing admiration and a touch of unease. The Isabella who'd left had been intelligent and strong. The woman who'd returned was formidable. She spoke of global markets and political connections with the casual expertise of someone who'd spent years mastering these subjects. I also learned about you, Isabella continued, her voice taking on a more personal tone. Your reputation extends far beyond New York, Vincent. In London's financial district, the Moretti name is spoken with respect. You've built something remarkable. We've built something remarkable, Vincent corrected. Everything I've done has been with the thought of what I'd be leaving for you. Isabella's eyes softened at his words, and for a moment, he saw the girl who'd climbed onto his lap all those years ago. I know, and I'm ready to claim my inheritance. The city's changed, Isabella observed as they drove through familiar streets. Her eyes cataloged everything: new construction, different businesses, subtle shifts in neighborhood demographics that spoke to changing power structures. But the bones are the same. The power structures, the territorial divisions, the unspoken rules that govern everything. The Torinos have been pushing into our territory, Vincent explained, his jaw tightening at the mention of his enemies. They think my attachment to you makes me weak. They've been testing boundaries, seeing how far they can push before I push back. Isabella's laugh was sharp, dangerous, and entirely new. How spectacularly wrong they are. They're still thinking in old terms, seeing love as weakness instead of strength. They don't understand that a man with something to protect is the most dangerous man of all. The mansion looked exactly as Isabella remembered, but she saw it now with adult eyes. The security measures that had seemed normal in childhood now revealed themselves as the sophisticated defenses they were. Hidden cameras, reinforced positions for guards, escape routes disguised as architectural features. Vincent had turned their home into an impregnable fortress while maintaining its elegant facade. "Maria!" Isabella called as they entered, and the elderly housekeeper appeared as if summoned by magic. The years had aged her, but her eyes still sparkled with the warmth Isabella remembered. "Miss Isabella," Maria said, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks as she embraced the young woman she'd helped raise. "Look at you. So beautiful, so strong, just like your mother would have been." "I missed you," Isabella said sincerely, breathing in the familiar scent of Maria's lavender soap. "I missed home. I missed family." That evening, Vincent held a family dinner, the first in years. His lieutenants, men who'd known Isabella as a child, struggled to reconcile the poised woman before them with their memories. Isabella handled their scrutiny with aplomb, discussing business with an insight that surprised even Vincent. She'd clearly spent her time abroad studying more than just academics. "The London markets are shifting," she said over wine, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd spent 4 years studying global economics. "There are opportunities for legitimate expansion if we're smart about it. Money laundering is becoming increasingly difficult with new international banking regulations, but there are legal ways to achieve the same results." "You want to go legitimate?" asked Tony Ricci, Vincent's oldest friend and advisor. His tone was skeptical. The idea of abandoning their traditional methods seemed almost heretical. "I want to be untouchable," Isabella replied, her dark eyes flashing with ambition. "Legal businesses provide cover and respectability, but I'm not naive about what we are or what we do. I'm talking about evolution, not abandonment of our principles. We can maintain our power while operating within the law. It just requires more sophistication." The men around the table exchanged glances. This wasn't the child they remembered, but a woman who understood power in ways that impressed even hardened criminals. She spoke of international finance and political influence with the same casual expertise Vincent displayed when discussing territorial disputes. "The old ways are becoming obsolete," Isabella continued, warming to her theme. "Technology, globalization, increased law enforcement cooperation. They're all making traditional organized crime more difficult and more dangerous. but they're also creating new opportunities for those smart enough to adapt. Later, alone in Vincent's study, Isabella approached the chess set they'd played on countless times before. The pieces were exactly where they'd left them 4 years ago. Vincent had never moved them, as if preserving a moment in time. The sight of the unchanged board brought tears to her eyes, evidence of how much she'd meant to him even in her absence. "Your move," she said, settling into her old chair. The leather was worn smooth from years of use, molded to her body like a familiar embrace. As they played, Vincent studied her face, looking for traces of the child he'd raised. They were there, in the way she bit her lip when concentrating, in the triumphant smile when she captured one of his pieces. But overlaying it all was something new, a woman's confidence, a woman's desires, a woman's understanding of her own power. "I meant what I said before I left," Isabella said quietly, not looking up from the board as she moved her queen into position. The piece was carved from black marble, smooth and cold under her fingers. "Isabella, I'm not a child anymore, Vincent. I know exactly what I'm saying, what I'm choosing." She looked up then, her dark eyes meeting his with unwavering certainty. "The question is, what do you choose?" Vincent stared at the board, at her elegant fingers still resting on the chess piece, and realized that the game had changed completely. The little girl who'd promised to marry him had become a woman capable of claiming that promise, and capable of destroying him if he rejected it. "You could have any life you wanted," he said quietly, his voice rough with emotion. "Any man. You're beautiful, intelligent, educated. You could marry into legitimate society, have children, live without looking over your shoulder." "I could," Isabella agreed, her voice steady. "But I don't want any life. I want this life. I want you. I've spent 4 years in a world where everything was safe and predictable and boring. I've dated men who were handsome and successful and completely forgettable. None of them understood me the way you do. None of them challenged me, protected me, loved me the way you do. You don't understand what you're asking for." Isabella leaned back in her chair, studying him with an expression that was both patient and predatory. "Don't I? I'm asking to be your partner in every sense of the word. Your wife, your equal, your ally in building something greater than what either of us could achieve alone. I'm asking you to trust me with your heart the way I trusted you with mine when I was 6 years old." Vincent felt something crack inside his chest, a wall he'd built around his heart to keep it safe. "Isabella, I love you, Vincent," she said simply, the words hanging in the air between them like a challenge. "Not the legend, not the power, not the protection you represent. I love you. The man who held a broken child and promised she'd never be alone. The man who taught me to be strong, to be smart, to be fearless. The man who's been waiting for me to come home." Before Vincent could respond, the sound of his phone buzzing interrupted the moment. He glanced at the screen and his expression hardened, the mask of the crime boss sliding back into place. "What is it?" Isabella asked, immediately alert to the change in his demeanor. "Torino," Vincent said grimly, his voice carrying the cold edge that had made him legendary. "He wants to meet. Tomorrow night. Says it's time to settle old debts." Isabella's smile was sharp as a blade, transforming her beautiful features into something predatory. "Perfect. It's time I reintroduced myself to an old family friend." Vincent looked at her, really looked at her, and saw not the child he'd protected, but the woman who could stand beside him in the darkness ahead. The little girl who'd promised to marry him had become someone who could help him win a war. And for the first time in his life, Vincent Moretti was afraid, not of his enemies, but of how much he wanted to say yes to everything Isabella was offering. The next few weeks fell into a careful dance of proximity and restraint. Isabella integrated herself into the family business with a natural aptitude that both impressed and concerned Vincent's men. She attended meetings, offered strategic insights, and gradually earned the respect of hardened criminals who'd initially seen her as Vincent's weakness. But beneath the surface, tensions were building on multiple fronts. Isabella's presence changed the dynamics of every room she entered. The men who'd known her as a child struggled to reconcile their memories with the formidable woman before them, while newer associates found themselves intimidated by her combination of beauty and intelligence. She had a way of asking questions that cut straight to the heart of issues, exposing weaknesses in plans that had seemed solid moments before. The shipping contracts need to be restructured, Isabella said during a meeting about their legitimate businesses. The current terms leave us vulnerable to federal scrutiny. I've drafted new language that provides the same benefits while creating legal distance from our other operations. Vincent watched his lieutenants' faces as they reviewed her proposals. These were men who'd spent decades in the business. Yet Isabella's suggestions showed a sophistication that impressed even the most cynical among them. She'd clearly spent her time in London learning more than just academic theory. The Torinos aren't just pushing territory, Tony warned during a private meeting with Vincent later that day. They're building alliances. The Russos, the Colombians, even some of the Irish crews. Word on the street is they think Isabella's return makes you vulnerable. Vincent's jaw tightened as he studied surveillance photos spread across his desk. The images showed meetings between rival families, money changing hands, weapons being distributed. The Torinos were preparing for something big, and they were using Isabella's presence as a rallying cry for other families who resented Moretti power. Let them think that, Vincent said, his voice carrying the cold confidence that had made him legendary. It's their mistake to make. Vincent, Tony said carefully, choosing his words with the precision of someone who'd known him for 20 years. Maybe they have a point. Not about vulnerability, but about complications. Isabella's not a child anymore. The way you look at her, the way she looks at you. People are talking. Let them talk. This isn't just gossip. Some of the old families are saying you've lost perspective, that you're thinking with your heart instead of your head. They're questioning whether you can make the hard choices when it comes to her. Vincent's eyes flashed dangerously, the temperature in the room seeming to drop several degrees. Are you questioning my judgment, Tony? I'm questioning whether you can see clearly when it comes to her, Tony replied honestly, his loyalty to Vincent overriding his sense of self-preservation. I've known you for 20 years. I've never seen you like this. You're different around her, softer, more human. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but in our world, it can be dangerous. Before Vincent could respond, Isabella appeared in the doorway. She'd changed from her business attire into jeans and a sweater, looking younger but no less formidable. Her timing was perfect, too perfect to be coincidental. She'd clearly been listening, waiting for the right moment to make her entrance. Am I interrupting? She asked, though her tone suggested she didn't particularly care if she was. We were just discussing security arrangements, Vincent said. His voice carefully neutral, Isabella's smile was knowing, the expression of someone who'd heard enough to understand the real topic of conversation. You were discussing me. It's all right, Tony. I know some people think I'm Vincent's weakness. Tony had the grace to look embarrassed, his weathered face flushing slightly. Isabella, I didn't mean... You meant exactly what you said, and you're not wrong to be concerned. Isabella moved into the room with fluid grace, settling into a chair with the confidence of someone who belonged there. But you're making the same mistake the Torinos are making. You're assuming that love makes someone weak, doesn't it? Tony asked, genuinely curious about her perspective. Only if you love someone weak, Isabella replied, her dark eyes flashing with steel. Vincent doesn't. I'm not some sheltered princess who needs protection from the harsh realities of this world. I was forged in the same fire that made him. The difference is, I had him to guide me through it. Vincent watched this exchange with fascination. Isabella was handling Tony's concerns with a combination of understanding and steel that impressed him. She wasn't defensive or emotional. She was strategic, turning a potential weakness into a demonstration of strength. The Torinos are planning something big, Isabella continued, pulling out a tablet and swiping through financial documents with practiced efficiency. I've been tracking their money movements through my London contacts. They're liquidating assets, calling in debts, consolidating cash. That's not expansion behavior, that's preparation for war. Vincent leaned forward, studying the data with the intensity of a general reviewing battle plans. Where did you get this information? I have friends in London's financial district. They owe me favors. Isabella's smile was mysterious, hinting at depths of connection and influence that even Vincent hadn't fully grasped. You're not the only one who knows how to build networks, Vincent. The difference is, mine are legal and international. Tony examined the documents with growing respect, his earlier concerns about Isabella's influence beginning to fade. This is incredibly detailed intelligence, better than anything our usual sources have provided. It gets better, Isabella said, swiping to another screen filled with transaction records and communication intercepts. They're not just preparing for war with us. They're planning to frame us for something that will bring federal attention, something big enough to justify a massive law enforcement response. Vincent's blood chilled as the implications sank in. What kind of something? I'm still working on that. But whatever it is, it's happening soon, within the next 2 weeks, based on their financial timeline and the pattern of their communications. The room fell silent as the weight of her words settled over them. The Torinos weren't just planning a territorial war. They were planning to destroy the Moretti family entirely, using the federal government as their weapon. We need to move first, Tony said, his hand instinctively moving toward his concealed weapon. No, Isabella said firmly, her voice carrying an authority that surprised even Vincent. We need to be smarter than that. If we strike first, we play into their hands. They want us to look like the aggressors, to justify whatever they're planning. Then what do you suggest? Vincent asked, genuinely curious about her strategic thinking. Isabella's smile was sharp as a blade, transforming her beautiful features into something predatory. We give them exactly what they want. We let them think they're winning, right up until the moment we destroy them completely. Over the following days, Isabella's plan took shape with the precision of a Swiss watch. It was elegant in its complexity, using the Torino's own strategy against them while positioning the Moretti family as victims rather than aggressors. She worked 18-hour days, coordinating with her London contacts, analyzing financial data, and building a case that would not only protect them, but eliminate their enemies permanently. Vincent watched her work with a mixture of admiration and desire that grew stronger each day. Isabella had become everything he'd hoped she would: intelligent, strong, ruthless when necessary, but never cruel. She was his equal in every way that mattered, and the realization was both thrilling and terrifying. The tension between them was becoming impossible to ignore. They worked side by side, their hands brushing as they reached for the same documents, their eyes meeting across conference tables in moments of shared understanding. The air between them crackled with unspoken desire and the weight of promises made and deferred. Isabella's plan required them to appear vulnerable while actually being stronger than ever. She orchestrated a series of seemingly random events, a failed business deal here, a security breach there, that painted a picture of a family in decline. But each apparent weakness was actually a trap, carefully designed to lure their enemies into overconfidence. The beauty of it, Isabella explained to Vincent one evening as they reviewed the latest intelligence reports, is that they're so focused on what they think they see that they're blind to what's actually happening. They think they're hunting us, but we're the ones setting the snares. It came to a head one night when Isabella found Vincent cleaning his gun in his study, a ritual she remembered from childhood. But now, watching his strong hands move with practiced efficiency, she felt something very different from childhood comfort. The sight of him, dangerous, competent, absolutely in control, sent heat racing through her veins. "Expecting trouble?" she asked, settling into the chair across from his desk, her voice slightly breathless. "Always." He didn't look up from his work, but Vincent was acutely aware of her presence, of the way her perfume mixed with the scent of gun oil, of how the lamplight caught the gold threads in her dark hair. "You should consider going back to London," he said suddenly, the words torn from him by fear for her safety. "Just until things settle." No. The finality in her voice made him pause, his hands stilling on the weapon. "Isabella, I'm not running, Vincent. I'm not that scared little girl anymore." She leaned forward, her eyes blazing with determination and something else. Something that made Vincent's pulse race. "I'm exactly where I belong. You don't understand the danger. I understand it perfectly." She stood, moving around the desk until she was close enough to touch him, close enough that he could feel the heat radiating from her body. "I also understand that you're afraid. I'm not afraid of the Torinos. You're afraid of me, of us, of what I represent." Her hand covered his, stilling his movements completely. "You're afraid that if you let yourself want me, you'll lose the control that's kept you alive all these years." Vincent's eyes met hers, and for a moment, the mask slipped completely. She saw the man beneath the legend, lonely, scarred, desperate for connection but terrified of the cost. The vulnerability in his expression made her heart ache with love and determination. "You could have any life you wanted," he said quietly, his voice rough with emotion. "Any man. Why choose this? Why choose me? Because you're the only man who's ever seen me completely and never tried to change me. Because when I was 6 years old and lost everything, you gave me a home. Because you taught me to be strong, to be smart, to be fearless." She cupped his scarred cheek with her free hand, her touch gentle but sure. "Because I love you, Vincent. Not the legend, not the power, you." The moment stretched between them, charged with 4 years of separation and a lifetime of connection. Vincent felt his carefully constructed walls crumbling under the weight of her honesty, her courage, her absolute certainty. Before he could respond, the sound of breaking glass echoed through the mansion, shattering the intimate moment like a gunshot. Vincent was on his feet instantly, gun in hand, pushing Isabella behind him as his security team's voices crackled through his earpiece. "Sir, we have multiple breaches. Torino soldiers, at least a dozen. They're moving fast and they're heavily armed." The war had come to them, but as Vincent prepared to defend his home, he realized something had fundamentally changed. He wasn't just fighting for his empire anymore. He was fighting for his future, a future that suddenly seemed impossible to imagine without Isabella by his side. The little girl who'd promised to marry him had become a woman worth fighting for. Now he just had to survive long enough to tell her so. The attack was swift and brutal, but the Torinos had underestimated their target. Vincent's paranoia had turned the mansion into a fortress, and Isabella was no longer the helpless child they remembered. The sound of automatic weapons fire echoed through the halls as Vincent's security team engaged the intruders. But this wasn't a random assault. It was a coordinated military-style operation designed to eliminate the Moretti family permanently. "Stay down," Vincent commanded as gunfire erupted in the hallway outside his study, the distinctive crack of high-powered rifles mixing with the deeper boom of shotguns. Instead, Isabella moved to the wall safe, her fingers flying over the combination with muscle memory. The safe contained more than just weapons, cash, documents, and emergency communication equipment that could summon help from allies across the city. "You taught me to shoot for a reason," she said, pulling out a pistol and checking the magazine with practiced efficiency. "I'm not hiding while they try to kill you, Isabella. We're stronger together, Vincent. You know that." Her voice was steady despite the chaos around them, the training he'd given her over the years finally being put to the ultimate test. The mansion's security system was state-of-the-art, with reinforced panic rooms, bulletproof glass, and enough hidden passages to confuse an army. But the Torinos had done their homework, bringing enough firepower to level a city block and the tactical knowledge to exploit every weakness in the building's defenses. The next hour was a masterclass in coordinated violence. Vincent and Isabella moved through the mansion like a perfectly synchronized team, covering each other's backs as they eliminated threats. Isabella's training showed she was calm under fire, accurate with her shots, and most importantly, she trusted Vincent completely. Years of chess games and strategic discussions had taught her to think several moves ahead, anticipating enemy movements and positioning herself for maximum advantage. "Kitchen's clear," Isabella reported through their comm system, her voice steady despite having just killed 2 men who'd been trying to flank their position. "East wing secure," Vincent replied, his own voice carrying the cold efficiency that had made him legendary. "Tony, what's your status?" "Torino brought more men than we thought." Tony's voice crackled back through static and gunfire. "Professional soldiers, not street thugs. But we're holding... They're trying to push toward the main house." Vincent and Isabella regrouped in the mansion's central hallway, both breathing hard but uninjured. Around them, the evidence of battle scarred the elegant space. Bullet holes in priceless paintings, shattered marble, the acrid smell of gunpowder mixing with the scent of fear and death. The mansion that had been Isabella's sanctuary was being transformed into a war zone. "This isn't random," Isabella said, reloading her weapon with movements that were becoming automatic. "They're not trying to kill us. They're hurting us somewhere specific." Vincent's eyes narrowed as he processed her observation, his tactical mind analyzing the pattern of the attack. The main hall. They want us in the open, probably for some kind of dramatic finale. It's a trap. Of course it's a trap. The question is whether we spring it on our terms or theirs. Isabella's smile was fierce, the expression of a predator who'd found worthy prey. I vote for our terms. They made their way toward the mansion's grand foyer, moving with the careful precision of hunters stalking dangerous game. The sounds of battle had died down, leaving an ominous silence that set Vincent's nerves on edge. His men were either dead or had retreated to defensive positions, leaving the mansion's heart vulnerable to whatever the Torinos had planned. The grand foyer was a monument to Moretti power, soaring ceilings, marble columns, and a sweeping staircase that had witnessed 3 generations of family history. Tonight, it would witness either their triumph or their destruction. Vincent Moretti. The voice echoed through the mansion's main hall, amplified by the soaring ceilings and marble surfaces. I have something that belongs to you. They found Marco Torino in the grand foyer, holding Maria, the elderly housekeeper, with a gun pressed to her gray head. The old woman's eyes were wide with terror, but she remained silent, dignified even in the face of death. Blood trickled from a cut on her forehead, and her usually perfect appearance was disheveled from rough handling. Behind Marco stood 6 heavily armed men, their weapons trained on every entrance to the room. Let her go, Marco, Vincent said, his own weapon trained on the younger man. Your fight is with me. My fight is with everything you care about, Marco snarled, his eyes wild with the desperation of a man who knew he was already dead. Starting with the old woman, then your precious little princess. I'm right here, Isabella said, stepping into view with her gun raised. No need to threaten innocent people. Marco's eyes widened as he took in her appearance, no longer hiding behind Vincent, but standing beside him as an equal. The child he remembered had become a woman who looked like she could kill him without losing sleep. Her transformation was so complete that for a moment, he seemed genuinely shocked. The little Castellano girl all grown up, Marco sneered, though Vincent could hear the uncertainty in his voice. Your father would be ashamed to see you standing with his murderer. My father would be proud, Isabella replied calmly, her weapon never wavering. He always said the strongest families are built on loyalty and love, not fear and hatred. Pretty words. Let's see how pretty you are with a bullet in your head. Marco began to swing his gun toward Isabella. But he'd made a fatal mistake. He'd underestimated the bond between Vincent and Maria. The old woman, who'd raised Vincent from a boy and loved him like a son, threw herself sideways just as Vincent fired. The shot took Marco center mass, spinning him around and sending him crashing into the mansion's grand staircase. But Marco's men opened fire immediately, turning the elegant foyer into a killing field. Vincent and Isabella dove for cover behind marble columns as bullets chipped stone and shattered priceless artwork. The firefight was intense but brief. Vincent's remaining security team had been waiting for this moment, emerging from hidden positions to catch the Torinos in a crossfire. When the smoke cleared, Marco lay dying at the foot of the staircase, his blood spreading across marble that had been laid by Vincent's grandfather. His men were dead or wounded, their carefully planned assault turned into a massacre by superior tactics and intimate knowledge of the terrain. Vincent was at Maria's side instantly, checking for injuries while Isabella secured the scene with professional efficiency. The old woman was shaken but unharmed, her dignity intact despite her ordeal. I'm fine, Mr. Vincent, Maria said, though her voice trembled with reaction. Just scared for you and Miss Isabella. It's over, Vincent assured her, though his eyes remained alert for additional threats. No, Isabella said quietly, kneeling beside Marco's dying form. It's just beginning. Marco's eyes focused on her with difficulty, blood frothing at his lips as his life ebbed away. You think you've won? This was just the opening move? What do you mean? Isabella demanded, pressing her gun to his forehead. Marco's laugh was a wet, horrible sound that echoed off the marble walls. Federal task force. Already has everything they need. Financial records, witness testimony, surveillance footage. By tomorrow, you'll all be in chains. Vincent felt ice form in his veins as the implications hit him. What records? Fake ones, Marco gasped, his eyes beginning to glaze over. But good enough. to convince a jury. Your empire dies with you. Isabella's face went pale as she understood the true scope of the Torino plan. The financial movements I tracked, they weren't preparing for war. They were building a case. Marco's eyes fixed on her one last time, his voice barely a whisper. Too late to stop it now. Federal agents will be here within hours. His head fell back against the marble steps, death finally claiming him, but his final words echoed in the sudden silence like a death sentence. The Torinos had played a longer game than anyone had realized. The attack on the mansion wasn't meant to kill them. It was meant to provide the final piece of evidence for a federal case that would destroy them legally. In the aftermath, as sirens wailed in the distance and Vincent's men secured the scene, Isabella found herself in Vincent's arms for the first time as a woman. The embrace was fierce, desperate, filled with the terror of almost losing each other and the realization that their troubles were far from over. She could feel his heart pounding against her chest, could smell the gunpowder and fear that clung to his clothes. I thought I'd lost you, Vincent whispered against her hair, his voice rough with emotion he'd never allowed himself to show. Never, Isabella replied, pulling back to look into his eyes. But Vincent, if what Marco said is true, then we fight it, together. His hands framed her face, thumbs brushing away tears she didn't realize she'd shed. We've survived everything else. We'll survive this too. The federal government isn't the Torino family. We can't just eliminate the threat with bullets and intimidation. Vincent studied her face, seeing not just the woman he loved, but the strategic mind that could save them both. Then we'll be smarter than them. We'll use their own system against them, just like you suggested. How? By doing what you've been preparing for since you came back. We become untouchable through legitimacy, not just force. We turn this frame job into our opportunity to go completely clean. Isabella searched his eyes and saw something she'd never seen before. Not just love, but absolute trust. He was putting his life, his empire, his future in her hands without reservation. The weight of that trust was both terrifying and exhilarating. I love you, Vincent said, the words feeling foreign but right on his tongue. God help me, I love you more than my own life. I should have said it years ago, should have admitted what you've meant to me since you were 6 years old. Isabella's smile was radiant despite their circumstances, lighting up her face like sunrise after the darkest night. Then marry me, Vincent. Make me your wife, your partner, your equal. Let's face whatever comes next together. The world we live in is exactly where I belong. With you. She pressed closer to him, her voice fierce with determination. I've spent 4 years preparing for this moment, Vincent. Not just the attack, but everything that comes after. I know how to fight this kind of war. As police sirens grew closer and the reality of their situation pressed in around them, Vincent made his choice. He kissed her then, pouring 14 years of suppressed emotion into the contact, claiming her as she'd always claimed him. The kiss was desperate and tender, filled with promises and possibilities that had been denied too long. When they broke apart, both breathless, Isabella smiled through her tears. Was that a yes? That was a promise, Vincent replied, his voice steady despite the chaos around them. The same kind you made when you were 6. Cross my heart, Isabella whispered, making the same gesture she'd made as a child, her hand pressed over her racing heart. This time, Vincent made it too, sealing their commitment with the ritual that had bound them together all those years ago. But even as they sealed their commitment with that childhood ritual, both knew the real battle was just beginning. The Torinos might be finished, but the federal case Marco had mentioned could destroy everything they'd built. They had each other now, but they also had enemies who fought with law books instead of guns. And in Vincent's world, that might be the most dangerous threat of all. The war for their survival was about to shift from the shadows to the courtroom, and Isabella would need every skill she'd learned in London to save the man she loved and the empire they would build together. The little girl who'd promised to marry him had become a woman capable of saving them both. Now they just had to survive long enough to claim their future. The federal investigation hit like a tsunami 3 days after the attack on the mansion. FBI agents swarmed Vincent's legitimate businesses, seizing records, freezing accounts, and arresting key lieutenants on charges ranging from racketeering to money laundering. The media descended like vultures, painting Vincent as the last of the old-school crime bosses finally brought to justice. News vans lined the streets outside the mansion, reporters shouting questions at anyone who entered or left the property. But Isabella had spent 4 years in London learning how legitimate power worked, and she put that knowledge to devastating use. While Vincent's usual lawyers scrambled to understand the scope of the charges, Isabella was already 3 steps ahead, building a defense that would not only clear their names, but destroy their enemies permanently. "This evidence is fabricated," she told the team of lawyers she'd assembled. Not the usual criminal defense. Attorneys Vincent employed, but white-collar specialists from prestigious firms who understood how to fight the federal government on its own terms. The conference room in Vincent's study had been transformed into a war room, with whiteboards covered in financial charts and legal documents spread across every surface. "How can you be certain?" asked Margaret Chen, the lead attorney Isabella had poached from a top Manhattan firm. Margaret was known for her ruthless efficiency and her ability to dismantle federal cases through meticulous attention to detail. "Because I've been tracking the Torino family's financial movements for weeks," Isabella replied, spreading documents across the conference table with the precision of a general deploying troops. "They've been creating false documentation, bribing witnesses, and manufacturing evidence. But they made one crucial mistake. They used the same offshore banking network I've been monitoring." The evidence Isabella presented was staggering in its scope and detail. Every fake transaction, every forged document, every bribed witness, it all traced back to Torino money flowing through a complex web of shell companies and offshore accounts. She'd spent her years in London not just studying international finance, but building relationships with people who could track money across continents. "The question is," Margaret said, studying the evidence with growing amazement, "can we prove it in court before the damage is done? The government has already made arrests, seized assets. The court of public opinion—" "We don't need to prove it in court," Isabella replied with a smile that would have made a shark proud. "We need to prove it to the right people in the right way. The court of public opinion can be swayed, but only if we control the narrative from the beginning." Over the next 2 weeks, Isabella orchestrated a campaign that was part legal defense, part public relations offensive, and part intelligence operation. She used her London contacts to trace the Torino money through international banks, her Oxford connections to reach influential journalists, and her natural charisma to win over prosecutors who'd expected to face a typical mob lawyer. The transformation was remarkable to watch. Isabella moved through the legal and media worlds with the same confidence she'd shown in Vincent's study, turning every meeting into an opportunity to advance their cause. She gave carefully orchestrated interviews to sympathetic journalists, leaked selected evidence to prosecutors who were beginning to doubt their case, and systematically dismantled the Torino conspiracy piece by piece. "She's magnificent," Tony observed one evening as they watched Isabella on the news, calmly explaining to a hostile interviewer how the Moretti family had been the victims of an elaborate frame job. "I've never seen anything like it." Vincent nodded, his eyes never leaving the screen. Isabella was wearing a conservative navy suit that projected authority and respectability, her hair pulled back in a style that made her look like a Supreme Court justice. But her eyes held the same steel he'd seen when she was 12 years old, demanding to learn how to shoot. "The assistant U.S. attorney wants to meet," Margaret reported after a particularly intense day of negotiations. "Privately." "Off the record. What does that mean?" Vincent asked, though he suspected he already knew. "It means they're starting to believe our evidence," Isabella said, her voice carrying quiet satisfaction. "And they're looking for a way out that doesn't make them look incompetent or corrupt." The meeting took place in a neutral location, a private dining room at an exclusive Manhattan restaurant where federal prosecutors and defense attorneys could negotiate without media attention. The restaurant was the kind of place where deals that shaped the city were made over expensive wine and perfectly prepared meals, where power brokers gathered to divide up influence like pieces of a chess game. Isabella insisted on attending despite Vincent's concerns about her safety. She'd spent weeks preparing for this moment, studying every aspect of the case, every weakness in the government's position, every pressure point that could be exploited. "Ms. Castellano," Assistant U.S. Attorney David Morrison said as they settled around the table. Morrison was a career prosecutor with political ambitions, the kind of man who understood that high-profile cases could make or break careers. "I have to admit, your evidence is compelling." "It's more than compelling," Isabella replied smoothly, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd spent years in boardrooms with some of the world's most powerful people. "It's conclusive. The Torino family orchestrated an elaborate frame job using fabricated evidence and perjured testimony. They've made a mockery of your investigation and, by extension, the entire federal justice system." Morrison shifted uncomfortably in his chair, clearly struggling with the implications of what Isabella was saying. "Even if that's true, we've already made arrests, seized assets. The media attention alone will make you look like either a fool or a hero. Depending on how you handle the next few days," Isabella interrupted, her tone remaining perfectly professional despite the steel beneath her words. "You can continue pursuing charges you know are false and destroy your reputation when the truth comes out. Or you can be the prosecutor who uncovered a massive conspiracy to frame an innocent family." Vincent remained silent, letting Isabella handle the negotiation. She was magnificent, poised, intelligent, absolutely in control of the room despite being the youngest person there. Every word was calculated, every gesture designed to project strength and reasonableness in equal measure. "What exactly are you proposing?" Morrison asked, his political instincts warring with his legal training. "Full immunity for Vincent and all family members in exchange for our cooperation in prosecuting the real criminals," Isabella said, sliding a carefully prepared document across the table. "We provide evidence of the Torino conspiracy, testify if necessary, and help you build cases against the corrupt officials they bribed. And in return, the Moretti family transitions to completely legitimate business operations. No more gray areas, no more questionable activities. We become model citizens, pillars of the community." Isabella's smile was perfectly calibrated, warm enough to seem genuine, sharp enough to remind everyone of the consequences of refusing her offer. Morrison studied the document, his expression revealing nothing. "You're asking me to trust the word of a crime family. I'm asking you to trust the word of a woman who's offering you the biggest corruption case of your career," Isabella replied without missing a beat. "The Torinos didn't just frame us. They bribed federal agents, state officials, and local police. We can give you all of them, wrapped up with a bow." The negotiation continued for hours, with Isabella systematically dismantling every objection, every concern, every attempt to maintain the status quo. She offered evidence that would expose corruption at every level of government, testimony that would put dozens of criminals behind bars, and most importantly, a path forward that would allow everyone to save face. "You realize what this means?" Vincent asked as they left the restaurant, the weight of their agreement settling over them like a shroud. "No more family business as we've known it. Everything legitimate from now on? Are you having second thoughts?" Isabella asked, studying his face in the dim light of the parking garage. Vincent considered the question seriously, understanding that his answer would shape the rest of their lives. The criminal empire his family had built over 3 generations would effectively end with him. But looking at Isabella, brilliant, beautiful, absolutely fearless, he realized he was gaining something far more valuable than he was losing. "No second thoughts," he said finally. "But it won't be easy. Going legitimate means giving up a lot of power, a lot of control. It means trusting in systems we've always operated outside of. It means trading one kind of power for another," Isabella corrected, her voice filled with quiet confidence. "Legal power, political influence, economic leverage. The kind of power that lasts, that can be passed down to our children without the constant fear of violence or imprisonment." 6 months later, the transformation was complete. The Moretti family's criminal enterprises had been dismantled or sold off, their legitimate businesses expanded and restructured under Isabella's careful guidance. Vincent found himself the CEO of a diversified corporation with interests in real estate, shipping and international trade, all completely legal, all highly profitable, all positioned for long-term growth. The process hadn't been without its challenges. Some of Vincent's old associates had felt betrayed by his decision to go legitimate, viewing it as an abandonment of everything they'd built together. Others had tried to muscle in on former Moretti territory, leading to brief but violent conflicts that Vincent had to resolve through careful diplomacy rather than overwhelming force. But Isabella had anticipated these challenges. building alliances with legitimate business leaders, cultivating relationships with politicians and law enforcement officials, and gradually transforming the Moretti name from a symbol of fear into a brand associated with success and respectability. The wedding of Vincent Moretti and Isabella Castellano was the event of the year in New York's social circles, a celebration that marked not just the union of two people, but the birth of a new kind of power couple. The ceremony took place at St. Patrick's Cathedral, with security provided by both private firms and off-duty police officers who'd become allies in their transition to legitimacy. Isabella walked down the aisle in her grandmother's restored wedding dress, the antique lace and silk transformed by master craftsmen into something that was both timeless and thoroughly modern. Her dark hair was crowned with diamonds that had belonged to Vincent's mother, stones that had witnessed 3 generations of Moretti history and would now begin a new chapter. Do you, Vincent Moretti, take Isabella Castellano to be your wife? Your partner, your equal in all things? The priest asked, his voice echoing through the cathedral's soaring spaces. I do, Vincent replied, his voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty and a love that had been tested by fire. Do you, Isabella Castellano, take Vincent Moretti to be your husband? Your partner, your equal in all things? Isabella's smile could have lit the entire cathedral, radiant with joy and triumph and the satisfaction of a promise finally kept. I do. I always have. The kiss that sealed their union was witnessed by politicians, business leaders, and reformed criminals who'd followed Vincent's lead into legitimacy. But in that moment, Vincent and Isabella were aware only of each other. The little girl's promise finally fulfilled, the woman's love finally claimed, the future they would build together finally beginning. The reception that followed was a masterclass in power and elegance. Isabella moved through the crowd like she'd been born to it, charming allies, building relationships, and proving to everyone present that Vincent Moretti's new wife was not just beautiful, but formidable. She spoke with senators and CEOs, judges and journalists, weaving a web of influence that would protect and advance their interests for years to come. You've outdone yourself, Vincent, said the mayor, who'd become an ally in their transition to legitimacy. She's magnificent. She always was, Vincent replied, watching Isabella laugh with a group of wives from prominent families. I just finally got smart enough to see it. Later, as the evening wound down and guests began to depart, Vincent and Isabella found themselves alone on the mansion's balcony where they'd shared so many conversations over the years. The space had been transformed for the wedding, with flowers and lights that turned it into something magical, but the view remained the same. The city spread out before them like a kingdom waiting to be claimed. Any regrets? Vincent asked, pulling her close and breathing in the scent of her perfume mixed with the night air. Only that it took us so long, Isabella replied, settling into his arms with the contentment of someone who'd finally found her home. Though I suppose we both needed time to become who we are now. And who are we now? Isabella looked out over the city that sprawled before them, lights twinkling like stars in the darkness. We're the future, Vincent. A new kind of family, a new kind of power. Built on love instead of fear, partnership instead of dominance, legitimacy instead of criminality. The old families won't like the changes we're making. Some of them see our transition as a betrayal of everything they believe in. Then they'll adapt or be replaced. Isabella's voice carried the steel that had made Vincent fall in love with her all over again. This is our time now. The age of ruling through fear and violence is ending. The future belongs to those who understand that real power comes from building something lasting, something that can survive in the light as well as the shadows. Vincent kissed the top of her head, marveling at the journey that had brought them here. From a scared little girl seeking comfort to a powerful woman claiming her destiny, Isabella had transformed not just herself, but him as well. She'd shown him that love wasn't weakness but strength. That partnership wasn't vulnerability but power multiplied. I love you, Mrs. Moretti, he whispered into the night air. I love you too, Mr. Moretti, always have, always will. As they stood together on the balcony, the city spread out before them like a kingdom waiting to be claimed. Vincent reflected on the strange turns of fate that had brought them to this moment. He'd built an empire through fear and violence, but it had taken the love of a remarkable woman to make him truly powerful. The little girl who'd promised to marry him when she grew up had kept her word in the most spectacular way possible. And Vincent Moretti, the man who'd thought himself incapable of love, had discovered that sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is open your heart to someone who can transform your entire world. Their empire would be different from those that came before, built on partnership, strengthened by love, and ruled by two people who understood that true power comes not from what you can take, but from what you're willing to protect and build together. The promise made by a 6-year-old girl had become the foundation of a dynasty that would reshape New York's power structure forever. And it all began with a simple truth. Sometimes the most powerful weapon in the world is a heart brave enough to love without limits. And sometimes the greatest victory is not conquering your enemies, but transforming yourself into someone worthy of the love you've been given. But their story was far from over. As they stood together in the moonlight, both Vincent and Isabella knew that their greatest challenges and their greatest triumphs still lay ahead. They had built something beautiful from the ashes of violence and fear, and now they would spend the rest of their lives protecting and nurturing what they had created together. The future stretched before them, bright with possibility and promise, and they would face it as they had faced everything else, together, as equals, as partners in every sense of the word. The little girl's promise had become a woman's triumph, and their love story would become legend. What did you think of Isabella and Vincent's incredible journey? From a childhood promise to a love that conquered both the underworld and the legitimate world. Their transformation from crime family to power couple shows that sometimes the greatest strength comes from love and partnership. Isabella's brilliant strategy to save their empire while transforming it into something legitimate proves that true power isn't about fear. It's about building something that lasts. Don't forget to like this video if their story moved you, subscribe for more amazing tales, and let me know in the comments. Do you believe in childhood promises that last a lifetime? What did you think of Isabella's incredible transformation from scared little girl to powerful woman? And would you have made the same choice Vincent did, giving up everything for love?